Welcome back to Palestine Bookshelf. I'm Stephen Heiner, and today we're going to be discussing The Iron Cage, the story of the Palestinian struggle for statehood by Professor Rashid Khalidi. This is a former library book. That's why there was a barcode up here over Professor Khalidi's first name, Rashid. The first couple reviews I did of this book, I had divided it into pre-1948 and post-1948 within the book itself. We're about 2 years ago on the Stephen Heiner channel, and in the YouTube version of this, I'll put links in the description as well as cards to those reviews if you'd like to see them. But you're going to see an angrier version of me, and I suppose that was a lot earlier in my journey. Those videos were recorded in December 2023. I had just started this project, and the things I had learned were angering to me. I'm not saying that I'm not angry now. I suppose it's just a matter of that anger becoming focused on the knowledge rather than the emotions that I feel when I read. And so despite how angry I was in those reviews, I still think they're useful, and I don't have anything to add to those reviews. So what I'm going to do in this one, as I have for many of my express reviews for Palestine Bookshelf of books I've already done reviews of, is I'm just going to read an excerpt. And from this, I'm going to read from the last pages of this text, which are talking about the one-state solution, which I think is something more and more people are understanding is the only way to move forward, especially with Netanyahu talking about the fact that there will be no two-state solution, reflecting the attitude of most Palestinians. So I will read Professor Khalidi's own thoughts on this. And keep in mind, he's writing this. This was published in 2006. So this is ages ago, the time of the successful Hamas election in Gaza and the beginning of the illegal and immoral blockade led by the US, the European Union, etc. The question of what state structure or structures are appropriate for Palestine and Israel has been profoundly influenced by the actions over many years of Palestinian leaders and different Israeli governments, as just described. It has been affected as well by important transformations in U.S. policy by the administration of George W. Bush since it came into office in January 2001. Until the Madrid Peace Conference in 1991, and for many years afterward, certainly until the failed Camp David-Taba talks of 2000 to 2001, the conventional wisdom was that the crafting of some sort of two-state solution to the conflict over Palestine and Israel was just a matter of time. It appeared to many that such a resolution depended on little more than a hard round of Palestinian-Israeli bargaining over borders and over just how restricted would be the sovereignty of a putative Palestinian state to arise alongside Israel, with issues like Jerusalem and refugees ultimately resolved by the stronger party imposing its will on the weaker one, with the help of its overbearing superpower ally. Among some observers, however, a realization has been growing for years that this outcome is increasingly unlikely. This realization has taken shape irrespective of the merits or demerits in principle of the two-state solution, in spite of the long-standing desire of majorities of Palestinians and Israelis for their own state, and notwithstanding the often grudging and hedged acceptance by each people of a state for the other. Starting with Meron Ben-Venisti, a former deputy mayor of Jerusalem, who from 1982 to 1990 ran the West Bank Database Project, a variety of analysts have argued that the policies carried out consistently over 4 decades by Israel's military security establishment and a succession of Israeli governments have changed everything. In this view, the inexorable cementing of Israel's hold over the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem have rendered moot the possibility of establishing what could legitimately be called a Palestinian state, and consequently have called into question whether a two-state solution is still possible. That is the case if a, quote, Palestinian state is taken to mean a viable, contiguous, sovereign, independent state on the entirety of the 22% of mandatory Palestine constituted by the Palestinian territories occupied by Israel in June of 1967. This realization has in turn instigated renewed consideration of the old idea of a one-state solution as either the ideal outcome or as the most likely default outcome for Palestine-Israel. There are significant differences among those who have put forward this idea. Some argue that whether such a solution is desirable or not to the peoples concerned, and majorities of both Palestinians and Israelis appear to prefer to live in separate national states, It is the inevitable outcome of the extension into the immediate future of current trends. Those who hold this view, which might be termed the de facto one-state solution, see that it will come about, notwithstanding Israel's recent withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and possible further West Bank withdrawals, when the inexorable creeping de facto annexation of the West Bank and East Jerusalem at some point finally makes the creation of a contiguous Palestinian state physically impossible. This process is taking place against the background of continued Palestinian population growth, combined with the realization among most Israelis that further successful ethnic cleansing of the Arabs is impossible. Those holding this view see that eventually this process will produce what is in effect a single sovereign, Israeli-dominated polity throughout Palestine, with either rough Arab-Jewish demographic parity or more likely an eventual Arab majority. In this scenario, some feel, in time it will prove impossible to keep the two peoples in one tiny land segregated, or to keep that polity Jewish-dominated, as it eventually became impossible to keep South Africa white-dominated. Those who foresee some kind of one-state solution emerging as a default outcome of what is perceived as the current reality of only one real state, one real sovereignty, and one people enjoying full national, political, civil, and human rights between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, render no value judgments about it. They do not advocate such a result. Rather, they perceive it as inevitable if present trends continue. There is little reflection among those who hold this conception about the future constitutional structure or other political arrangements between the two peoples. The unspoken assumption is that these are likely to be highly unequal. Similarly, there is little consideration of how it would be possible in such a single state to overcome either the apparent desire of both peoples for independent statehood or the deep and abiding distrust of each collectivity toward the other. This is therefore not a normative position, nor does it involve advocacy. It purports rather to be an empirical reading of current trends and their likely projection into the immediate to intermediate future. It does not address the likelihood that because it is at odds with the aspirations of both people, especially the Palestinians, such an outcome would be inherently unstable, and indeed might well be no more than a way station on the way towards some other outcome. Another strand of thinking about a one-state solution represents a throwback to the old Palestinian idea of a single unitary state in Palestine with two variations. Some see this in terms of the previous PLO conception of a secular democratic state in all of Palestine with equal rights for all its inhabitants, Israeli and Palestinians, whatever their faith, but no separate national rights for Israelis. Others, notably leaders of Hamas, see this outcome in terms of an Islamic state in which non-Muslims would be tolerated minorities. Both of these groups actively advocate such an outcome as the ideal one, and many of the Palestinians among them make little effort to make it appealing to Israelis. Indeed, the violent actions, including suicide attacks on Israeli civilians of groups like Hamas that advocate the one-state solution, make such an option even more detestable to Israelis. Others, whose views may overlap with these and who ostensibly limit themselves to advocating the unlimited implementation of the right of Palestinians to return to their homes in Israel, often do so without specifying explicitly that if most Palestinian refugees were to return to what is now Israel, which they assume on the basis of little or no hard evidence that most of them would want to do, this would necessarily turn Israel from a state with a Jewish majority into one with an Arab one. It can be argued that such an outcome would indeed be intended by most of them to do just that. Just how Israel could be brought to agree to such a revolutionary outcome is not addressed by partisans of this approach. Still, another group that advocates a one-state solution does so on the basis of a binational approach. This is predicated on the recognition that there are two national communities in Palestine, Israel. It is combined with acceptance of the fact, recognized by many others, that the consolidation of Israel's occupation regime for over 39 years, which constitutes more than two-thirds of that country's 58 years of existence, combined with creeping annexation and the metastasis of the settlements, as well as economic imperatives, render impossible the creation of a separate, independent, viable, contiguous Palestinian state. There follows from this realization advocacy of a framework that would take into account these two national realities within the framework of one state. What must be said about all of these approaches is that they involve, so far at least, neither very deep nor very detailed thinking about the implications of a one-state solution, whichever variety of such a solution is at issue. I'll pause there for a moment just to backtrack on that idea of a binational approach. The example that is suggested to us by this, what Professor Khalidi is pointing to, was what Dayton created, the Dayton Accords created in Bosnia. So you have Republika Srpska and you have Bosnia, this binational reality within a single country. It's a fragile piece. It's held together since the 90s, and their history is not so horrific as that of the Palestinians and Israelis, but it's still something to think about when Professor Khalidi is going through this thought exercise with us. So there are examples of countries with binational realities, and just something to think about. If you are enjoying this content, please remember to hit like or subscribe. Share this content with people who would appreciate hearing Professor Khalidi's perspectives as a Palestinian. Moreover, they face a stone wall of rejection not only in Israel but also in the United States, where any suggestion that appears to call into question the desirability or the likelihood of the continued existence of Israel in precisely its present form is increasingly being treated as tantamount to anti-Semitism. And we've seen this with the new definition of anti-Semitism, which it includes criticism of Israel, criticism of Zionism, as effectively anti-Semitism. There are other problems, however. It is worth noting, for example, that beyond the desire of most Israelis to maintain their state as it is, irrespective of what that may do to the Palestinians and in the long run perhaps to Israel itself, and beyond the unquestioned power of Israel to determine outcomes in the region, the State of Israel, as presently constituted, has strong roots in international legality. This is a function of its creation as a direct result of UN General Assembly Resolution 181 in 1947, which called specifically for the establishment of a Jewish state alongside an Arab state and a special international regime for the city of Jerusalem. That resolution, which is the basis of Israel's international legitimacy and standing, explicitly described it as a Jewish state. As I've already pointed out, this formulation was implicitly accepted by the PLO in 1988 when it issued its Declaration of Independence of a Palestinian State on the basis of Resolution 181 and simultaneously recognized Israel. It is true that this resolution specified frontiers that Israel expanded well beyond from the beginning of its existence at the expense of the stillborn Palestinian Arab state. There is presumably nothing that would prevent a change in the nature of this Israeli state should it occur by voluntary choice of its citizens. Indeed, profound changes in its nature have been taking place gradually since 1967 as a result of the colonization and effective absorption of much of the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem into Israel. But Israelis have thus far shown more of a desire for the Palestinians to be out of sight and out of mind than to come to grips with the consequences of the actions of their elected governments, insofar as settlements and occupation are concerned. Barring such a voluntary change, this international anchoring of the current nature of Israel as a Jewish state would seem to be yet another obstacle to some forms of a one-state solution. I want to take a moment to pause and remind people about our sticker fundraiser that we're doing for the Hind Rajab Foundation. Normally, the book reviews, the income that we generate on Substack go to the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. That's not changing, but I wanted to do something for the Hind Rajab Foundation, so I created these various stickers, which you can see. There's links to it in the description. 100% of the proceeds for these stickers will go towards that foundation, and they're great conversation starters. You can put them on the side of a water bottle, on your laptop, on a notebook, and start a conversation with somebody, see how it goes. So consider that for gifts for this time of year. What are we left with as far as the state of Palestine is concerned? Certainly, the aspirations of the Palestinians to live as a sovereign people in their own land are likely to be further denied, for a time at least, and perhaps lastingly. Their ability to exercise sovereignty in the context of a viable, independent Palestinian state may well have been closed off permanently by the success of Sharon's program, materially abetted by the collusion of the Bush administration over 6 crucial years. Thus, if the Palestinian people are to exercise their inalienable national rights, they must take the initiative and devise new forms and conceptions for the future, suitable to the situation in which they find themselves, to their increasing subjugation and denial of rights, to being in effect captives of the powerful Israeli nation-state. It is hoped that these forms will be more imaginative, more comprehensive, and more effective than those that have gone before, and that they will produce a more successful leadership. But unless what politicians have done is undone by other politicians, something that seems now more unlikely given President Bush's issuance in his April 2004 letter of what has been hyperbolically described as amounting to a new Balfour Declaration. Or unless by some tragic happenstance, ethnic cleansing again takes place in Palestine, which also seems unlikely in view of the apparent determination of the Palestinians not to allow themselves to be driven yet again from their homes, Professor Khalidi could not have foreseen October 7th. One thing appears certain. The realities on the ground will drive the Palestinians and the Israelis, now living under the unique sovereignty and control of Israel, into an entirely new configuration. How long the current configuration will continue, a situation worse in some senses than apartheid, what will follow after its evolution, if it does evolve, and what the state of Palestine will be at the end of the process, no one can say. It will certainly not improve if there is a continuing refusal to look honestly at what has happened in this small land over the past century or so, and especially at how repeatedly forcing the Palestinians into an impossible corner, into an iron cage, has brought, and ultimately can bring, no lasting good to anyone. Excellent conclusion to an important book. I think all Professor Khalidi's books are good and important. If you'd like to get a copy of this, there'll be a link in the description below. That's one of the ways that you can support this channel. A free way that you can support this channel I've already talked about. Hit like, subscribe, hype, share this video with people who are interested in learning more about Palestine from the mouths of Palestinians, Professor Khalidi being one of them himself. If you'd like to thank me for this presentation, there are links to buy me a coffee and PayPal below. If you'd like to support the channel on an ongoing basis, there's links to Substack. That is the primary way that this channel is monetized, and 100% of the proceeds, 100% of the profits from our Substack donations go to the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. You can check them out at pcrf.net. They're an incredible medical charity that helps Palestinian children get medical care who could not otherwise get it. Support them directly or support them indirectly by supporting us as well. And I already told you about the Hind Rajab Foundation fundraiser. There's links to that as well in the description. If you'd like to nominate a book for the future, there's a link to my Amazon wish list, and you'll find their books on Palestine. There's other books as well. That's for my Stephen Heiner channel if you want to go check that out. But books on Palestine are obviously for this channel. Buy one, send it my way, and I'll do my best to review it in a timely manner. Until next time, enjoy your reading.